Okay, so first question I would like to actually ask you is, hopefully most of you have heard about the Scottish SPCA that we work throughout the whole of Scotland. We are different to the RSPCA who operate in England and Wales only. We have a number of animal rescue officers, inspectors and education officers who go out and about around the country. We tend to respond to over 275,000 calls to our animal helpline each year, and our animal rescue officers and inspectors respond to around 80,000 incidents each year. So incidents might be going out to actually rescue an animal, but also will involve investigations as well. We also tend to rehome around 5,000 animals each year and also release around 5,500 wild animals back into the wild. It costs around £44,000 per day to run the Scottish SPCA. As you can imagine, most of those costs go towards the treatment of the animals in our care, so veterinary treatment, and also obviously housing them and providing everything that they need whilst they are with us. This year, we have continued to be quite busy. We have continued all our services throughout the pandemic, and certainly now as we head towards Christmas, the puppy trade is still very rife just now, and I'll mention that a little bit later, but that is certainly keeping our centres and our frontline staff extremely busy. When it comes to education, we came out of schools from March, but we went on to more of a digital platform, and we've started now re-engaging with schools since August, doing e-learning programmes. And again, I'll chat about that in a bit. But first of all, I wanted to ask you, what does the human-animal bond, what does that actual phrase mean to you? So I'll just give you a couple of seconds to sort of use the chat box and let me know what do you think that actually means to you? Have we got any feedback on that?
Not yet. I think people are typing. Katie says, I think about the connection I have with my cat.
Okay, very good.
Anyone else want to share? Oh, Andy's just said, the important relationship between ourselves and animals as sentient beings.
That's good. Yes, that is good. Okay, so I want you to think of your happy place. That might have been very different over the last few months. And when we do think about happy place, it might be things like going out for a run, maybe going to the beach, spending time with your family, spending time with friends, being quite creative. I know that some people, certainly some of my friends, have now started, taking up hobbies that they used to do. Maybe going out to the cinema, going on holidays, climbing a mountain. And that's quite important that we get chances to go and do those things, particularly if life can be quite challenging, quite difficult, that you find your happy place at different times. A child's happy place will be a little bit different. It'll be maybe dressing up, being superheroes. I've got two boys, and certainly they are full of energy. And I think most children, they want to be out, they want to be with their friends, they want to have the opportunity to play, to explore, be creative. Unfortunately, as parents, you then have to clear up all that mess. But that's such an important experience for a child to be able to learn about their world around them. When we get to more animals, again, sometimes people aren't quite sure what an animal's happy place would be. But again, very similar to us, there'll be places where they can do their natural behaviours, they've got space to move around, that they've got somewhere safe and comfortable to sleep. That some animals, not all, like to have company. They want to have that social interactions with others of their own kind, have the opportunity to play. And it's important that we remember that when we do have animals in our lives. And when that human-animal bond works, it works really, really well. And just to give you a few examples, so there'll be things like, oh, my computer, so there we go. Certainly when you are young and you may be having new experiences, you've maybe started school, an animal can be great for giving you that bit of reassurance, that bit of comfort, You know that the animal's going to be waiting for you when you come back, and they can be brilliant at, as I say, giving that reassurance, making someone feel safe. As you get a bit older as a child, then you want to start taking on responsibility. You want to prove that you are growing up and that you are learning all these new things. And animals are a good way where you can encourage children to be involved in the care of those animals. So the responsibility might be that you always help feed those animals in the morning, and that's the job that you do to help support everything that we do as a family. So it's important that all these things are instilled from a young age. As children again grow older, and we've seen through research that children find animals, it doesn't have to be your typical, your dogs, your cats, it can be birds, it can be rabbits, that an animal is someone that you can have maybe fun with, that you can share a joke, that someone that you can trust, that's quite dependable, and also someone that you can share with maybe feelings that you are quite sad about something. They're not going to judge you, and that they will actually listen. Certainly as you get older into your teenage years, you sometimes need that space to get away from people. Maybe it's getting away from members of your family, getting away from your peers, and encouraging that connection with nature to clear your head a little bit, take a step back. That can be really positive, particularly for mental health and well-being. And then as you get older, where you're starting to have to make maybe life choices, decisions on what you can do next with your career, maybe where you're going to live if you're thinking about actually leaving home. And again, animals are a great way who will just sit and listen to your thought process. They won't judge. They'll be patient with you. They don't talk back to you. And again, we've seen that how important an animal can play in someone's life. And then as we get into the sort of busy working world, it's really good, particularly animals such as dogs, where you think, okay, the dog still needs walks. I'll get away from my computer desk. I'll go out for a quick jog, clear my head a little bit, and then I'll come back refreshed. So they can be a great way for helping you to switch off. They can also be very good for helping to connect families together. We are very much in a digital age just now, and we are using a lot of technology for lots of different reasons. And again, particularly animals such as dogs, or you have to go and clean out rabbits, they're a great way because it's an activity that a family can do together. And by coming away from the technology and the distractions of day-to-day life, you actually help to get those conversations going again on what's happening, how's school going, don't see that friend coming around anymore, is everything okay? It's a brilliant way of trying to keep everybody together. And then as you get very much in your older years where the sort of is not as busy, maybe your family are all grown up, they've moved away, you might actually be on your own now. Animals are brilliant for helping to support people who maybe feel quite vulnerable, they maybe feel quite isolated, and it gives them an opportunity to not feel as lonely. And animals can play such a huge, important part of that. So another question for you. So those are all kind of really good examples of how humans and animals can support each other. But unfortunately, sometimes that bond can break. Why do you think? Can you give some examples of when you think that human-animal bond could break? Have there any reasons that you can think of? And again, just use the chat function for this.
Okay, I think we'll give people a minute or two to type that in.
Yeah.
So Andy said change of circumstances, such as getting a COVID pup when furloughed, then going back to work.
Mm-hmm.
And Katie has said changes of circumstances, such as having a child, moving house, etc.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. There's lots of reasons. Certainly having new members of the family arrive, your priorities kind of change in the household. Or maybe actually a new member of the family that's of the animal variety. So you maybe have cats, you decide to go and get a puppy, particularly if you have young children, you know, it's a very exciting time. Do you have time for everyone that's in your household? People's financial circumstances change. So You sometimes have to move, even if you don't want to have to move house. That means you maybe don't have the space or the financial commitment. It costs a lot of money to have an animal. You maybe don't have that in place to support an animal living with you. Unfortunately as well, we see the sort of responses to drugs, alcohol, separation. These can all play quite a challenging role in that sort of bond between a human and an animal. Domestic violence obviously is one that has been talked about quite a lot, and I'll just mention our First Strike campaign in a minute. But again, that can cause huge strains on a human-animal bond, and it can also, if a bond is strong, it can actually prevent someone from leaving that household and getting the help that they need. And of course, there's bereavement that happens, and it might be that an animal has belonged to one person, they pass away, other family members are not able to take the animal in due to obviously the lifestyle that they have. So again, that can then force that animal not having a home to stay in. And it's important to remember that, yes, there might be animals at the centre of this, but there might also be a child at the centre of this as well. How does that impact them? And when all these changes happen, we've seen, as I say, through research, that children have such a strong attachment to animals, particularly, and they tend to do it in a hierarchy approach, but often your dogs, cats, rabbits are popular pets that children feel so attached to. And if their circumstances change, the animal has to go somewhere, they have to go somewhere. That can have a huge impact on how they go through their lives and how they interact with others as they get older. I mentioned our First Strike campaign. We relaunched this actually this year. And this is really just trying to get everyone to recognise the link between animal cruelty and violent crime, looking for the early warning signs. So you can see from some of the graphics here that we know that a positive bond with a pet in childhood can lead to long-term kindness, encourage compassion towards animals, and that's very much why the Scottish SPCA places so much emphasis on animal welfare education. We do know that children exposed to violence and abuse can be at risk of harming animals, and we need to make sure that doctors, nurses, other medical experts, social workers and so on are aware of this link and they spot the early signs to help both the humans involved and also to help animals. We do a lot of work with the veterinary profession. Vets have such a key role in spotting animal abuse. And we know that there's many vets out there who do see the link between animal cruelty and domestic abuse, but they sometimes struggle with what they do with that information. We even just had an example where we got asked for some advice just a couple of weeks ago. It was down in England, where a puppy had been taken to a vet practice. This was the third puppy that had been taken in from that family. 2 other pups had passed away. And each time this pup is coming with injuries like burn marks and so on, and it's not matching up with the story that's getting told to the veterinary profession. And thankfully, in this case, the vet has sought advice. And it turned out that this family has taken this puppy to other vet practices in the area to try and go a bit more unnoticed. And this is a huge thing that we at the Scottish SPCA and many other organisations are trying to work very closely with. I don't know if you've heard of the Links group, but that's very much trying to provide the resources and the education to help support particularly the veterinary profession and make sure they've got a good toolkit there to pick up on these things and get the help that's needed. From all the research that's gone on into the link, we know that someone who is cruel to an animal is 5 times more likely to be cruel to a human than someone who isn't. So that's a really staggering statistic, and one that, again, we need to make sure that we raise awareness of this and get that recognition. Now, we know that there's been a lot of changes in human-animal relationships over the years. So to give you an idea, the Scottish SPCA, we have been going since 1839. We originally set up in Edinburgh, where we looked after the cart horses down in Leith Docks. And it was working with the owners of those horses, trying to get them to understand that if you gave your horse rest, if you looked after their feet, then they'll work better for you. Like a machine, you oil it, you get it repaired, it works better. And that's basically how we started. Then obviously we moved on to other species. We still see, sadly, a lot of abandonments where people feel that instead of just ringing up for help, it's maybe almost that embarrassment factor. They end up abandoning animals, sometimes in obscure places, and it's just by chance these animals get found, like these cats that were dumped here. We still deal with neglect in this day and age with animals. Thankfully, the severe neglect cases are few and far between, but we still get them. And when it comes to livestock, we are quite fortunate that in Scotland, we have a really good farming industry. And often when there's livestock issues, something again has gone wrong in that farmer's life. Farmers are very proud of what they do, and they're not always good at asking for help when they need it. So we do work with other organisations. We work with RSABI, who are fantastic, because if there is an animal welfare issue on a farm, we will come in and we will obviously sort out everything with the animals, work out what's happening, and RSABI will sort out any of the financials that need to happen, help the farmer liaise with the bank, get mental health support if that's required. And throughout this, you'll see that partnership is such a key thing to making a difference when it comes to animal welfare and protecting that human-animal bond. In the current climate, the way we interact with animals has certainly changed a lot. Mentioned about the puppy trade. This is a huge issue, certainly in the UK and certainly in Scotland. We are seizing animals that are for the puppy trade. They are getting sold for extortionate prices online, and we're working very hard to try and combat this, but it comes down to public demand. And unfortunately, while that demand is still there, the people will still keep particularly bringing pups in from Ireland. We do go down to the Kenryan port. There are pups coming in. Even last week, there was a few coming in at 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning, and they had parvovirus and other conditions. So it's something that we will continue tackling. There's a Scottish Government Buy a Puppy Safely campaign that is running on at the moment, trying to educate the public a bit more about thinking about where you get your animal from. And that's also linking to our Say No to Puppy Dealers campaign, where again, we're encouraging people, please report your concerns, even if you think, oh, it's totally irrelevant information. It might be that missing piece that we need to try and track someone down, and try and prevent them from selling pups and passing them off as well-bred pups. We know that there's dog fighting going on. We know that there's badger baiting going on. And this is very much linked to often serious organised crime, where people are looking to place bets, want to make cash quick. And in some cases, they get that sort of thrill, that excitement out of watching a badger and a dog fight. And sadly, this is something that, again, still happens in Scotland more often than you think, and it's important that we work particularly very closely with Police Scotland to try and crack down on these people and try and also break that sort of acceptance in the society where people are from that it's okay to do this. And again, I've worked with young people who have grown up in these environments. They don't know anything different. This is what they know that their dads, their uncles go out and do, so to them that's normal. You know, there's nothing wrong with it because that's how they've grown up. So trying to change that behaviour and change those attitudes can be quite challenging, but there's lots of different ways that we can do that. Could you maybe think about then, how are animals used in society today? Can you maybe think of some examples of how we actually use animals?
So we'll give people a couple of minutes to post that in the chat box. Just while we wait, there's a comment from Andy here, Gilly, who said vets are becoming much more aware of the link, but there is still a long way to go in training vets to be aware of the often subtle signs of abuse. We also still face problems of veterinary employers being too scared of data protection regulations.
Yes, and that's definitely, we've actually established a veterinary working group with all the right people, I think, behind it. So all the universities that teach veterinary education in Scotland, we've also brought in the Royal Veterinary College, we've brought in various other people, more the decision makers, to try and address that, because there is a fear from vets in particular, and particularly if you're a new vet, you're newly qualified, you've joined a big corporate practice, you worry about upsetting the dynamics in that practice. So yes, that's certainly something that we will continue working on to make sure that it's okay to ask questions and it's okay to report things.
Absolutely. Katie's just said in response to this question. Pets and companion animals, assistance animals, entertainment, racing, for example, working animals and farmed animals. Andy said working dogs and guide dogs. And Bob says hello, and he says he says entertainment and pet shows.
Yeah. So yeah, we still use quite a lot of animals.
Sorry, Lauren also says people use them as gifts, which is a good one.
Yes, they do use them as gifts. So no, we still use a lot of animals in society in lots of different ways. We use them for education purposes, and particularly from a conservation angle often. Use them for entertainment. You see particularly like birds of prey shows. See more things coming up at sort of school fairs where you can go and ride a horse, or you can go and interact with this animal, or have your photograph taken with this animal. Something that we've seen, which has been a concern for us, is more of these sort of hatchery schemes in schools where you can sign up to a program and you get an incubator with eggs in them. That incubator stays with you for normally a couple of weeks, and obviously the chicks hatch during that period. And that's normally stationed in a really busy and noisy classroom. So the question mark around that is that the best environment? We've seen a lot more of dogs being brought into schools for supporting maybe young people with anxiety, for helping children read. And again, there's still a lot of interaction that goes on, particularly with equines as well. And also sort of travelling mobile animal exhibits, going out, and I'll come on to a bit more on this as well. We do obviously use animals when it comes to training for careers. So particularly in the veterinary profession, it's important that if you are learning to do a role where you're actually involved in the care of an animal, you need to have that practical experience. And we do work placements for veterinary students, particularly at Glasgow Vet School, because you can learn all the theory that you want, but that doesn't actually, you can read a book on how to handle a cat safely, so that you don't hurt it, so that you don't get injured. You actually need to put that into practice, but that practice needs to be supervised to make sure that nobody gets injured in that situation. And we've seen a lot more, particularly on the older adult side, where animals are being brought in to offer a bit of company, to offer that tactile sort of support, where it's something a bit different, particularly if you're in a care home. Every day is maybe quite similar. So is there something that you can use to brighten up your experience? We know that in some care homes, they've actually got chickens now on site, where particularly maybe someone who used to be a farmer or was involved in the care of animals, they get to have the opportunity to have a small holding where that's a responsibility, that's what they do. We've also seen a lot of fish tanks being brought into care homes, and there is a study that's going on just at the moment, I think it's University of West Scotland, and they're looking at the impact of having aquariums in care homes and seeing how that helps with mental health, with things like dementia. And it'll be interesting, that study is ongoing at the moment. It'll be interesting to see the results of that. We've also started seeing donkeys, miniature ponies, getting brought in. So this is very much portrayed more on the human benefit. And there was obviously a question mark around what do the animals get from this when they're taking part in these types of activities. So the benefits to humans, you would think, okay, it'll help tackle loneliness and isolation. It can offer assistance with daily tasks, particularly if you do have an assistance dog with you that actually lives with you. It can help reduce anxiety. It can help increase socialization. So if someone doesn't like engaging with other people, we've seen, obviously, an animal comes into the room, they go to that animal, or the animal finds them, and then they start talking about the animal, and then they maybe talk about things from the past, and that helps them actually communicate with others. It has been shown that particularly the sort of tactile stroking someone like a dog or a cat can reduce blood pressure. It can improve cardiovascular health, and it can also encourage physical activity. So again, you see in case studies where it's encouraged somebody who's maybe never walks about, never uses their walking aids. Well, actually, an animal comes in, they're like, oh no, the animal needs to go out, we need to go for a walk. That's what you do, and it encourages physical activity. and can provide a positive focus for people. And it sometimes, in cases, can help people become a bit more emotionally resilient. But when it comes to the benefits of the animals, certainly they get a companionship, they get attention, and a lot of animals, particularly dogs, thrive off that. For some animals, it's a second chance for them. So we've seen some of our animals get rehomed into lots of different roles. We recently had a spaniel, I want to say his name was Diesel, joined Scottish Fire and Rescue Service and was a detector dog for them, and came from a puppy farm. So in some cases, they can go on and it's a second chance for them. You could question whether they get better health because they're seen as a key support, as a service animal. Are they getting that investment to make sure that they're the healthiest that they can be? They get that stimulation. So animals, depending on, particularly dogs, depending on the breed of the dog, they need that activity. They need an opportunity to experience new things and have their attention grabbed. And it can be an outlet for sort of energy and intelligence. But what about the risks to both? So we know zoonotic diseases can be a risk, and we know that there's lots of health and hygiene that you need to do, particularly if you are interacting with certain species. There's always going to be a risk of injury if a child squeezes an animal too hard. One, the animal gets hurt. Two, the child could get bitten, could get scratched. We see a lot more about allergies to animals, particularly if they're furry animals. So again, that can be a risk. If it's an older adult, they get scratched, there's a higher risk of infection, just to do with the sort of immune response. It slows down as you get older. It can cause increased stress to both an animal and obviously a human. If you go into a classroom and you maybe bring the snake in, and you've got a child in the class who's absolutely petrified of snakes, their stress levels are going to rocket up and they will be very fearful until that snake has left the room. Likewise, for an animal going into a noisy place, there's lots of unfamiliar sounds, unfamiliar smells. That certainly can cause a lot of stress. So the question is, welfare, is that being compromised? Certainly it can be in some cases, particularly if it's not a regulated activity, so there's no kind of licensing or no checks going on. And here's just an example of one case that we dealt with. And this was a man, he was only 26, who ran a reptiles party business. So he would take his reptiles to kids' parties. He had a large number of reptiles animals in his care in this one-bedroom flat, which is where he was keeping them. He had been investigated previously for things. He charged £80 per hour to bring his snakes and lizards and so on to children's parties. When we went into this property, he was found to be keeping 13 venomous snakes, 2 scorpions without the appropriate licenses. He also, some of the snakes, he had a boom slang and a western diamondback rattlesnake. So various things in there, not obviously the best. And obviously you can see what we discovered in the fridge as well. He actually got an 18-month jail sentence and a 10-year ban from keeping animals following this. And in conjunction with this, when his computer equipment was seized and phones, it also turned out he was into child pornography as well. And it just shows that because there's not this kind of licensing and sort of regime in for these types of establishments yet, you don't actually know who it is who's turning up to your parties, and is it safe for them to be there, and do they really know the types of animals that they've got? Lead on to my next question. Can you think, are there ways to promote positive human-animal bond? What type of things could you do to promote that in society?
That's absolutely mad, Gilly. Thank you for sharing that. I can't get over that with the man that was keeping the snakes. So if everyone could comment in the chat section now and just with their thoughts on this question on how to promote a positive human-animal bond, that would be great. In the meantime, while we wait for people to answer, just some responses to the previous question that you asked, Gilly. Katie was just saying that this time of year there's lots of reindeers used for entertainment. And yes. Fiona said also lab experiments, and Andy also added and said that animals are often used for status symbols. Katie again said that her best friend is training to be a vet, and she currently has a stunt dog, which is a soft toy, which she uses for practicing on at the moment.
Yeah.
That's great. Katie said, definitely start with children when promoting a positive human-animal bond. If they learn from a young age, it helps.
Yeah.
Fiona said something similar, and she said education in school.
Yeah, so exactly, it's starting young. One thing that we do, I mentioned that we work very closely with the University of Edinburgh, so we go out to schools, we deliver lots of different programs, and it's important, one, as a charity, that we obviously invest in our resources wisely, and that what we're doing, we want to obviously make sure that's making a difference. So we've looked at things like, could you use digital computer games? Does that make a difference? And certainly we've published a couple of papers on this now. And we did a small study where we had, for the sort of pet game, we had 92 children who took part in the activity, and we had 92 also control children as well. And we found that when they played the computer games, it increased their knowledge on sort of 5 freedoms for animals. They showed an increase in knowledge of appropriate and safe behaviour around animals. An interesting one with this was, after they played the game, we found that they had an increased belief that basically animals have feelings, which is a really important thing if they can recognise that. And they also had a decreased acceptance of cruelty towards animals. But what was interesting with this one is, because it's a digital game, there was no significant change when it came to their compassion towards animals, or what they felt was compassionate behaviour towards animals, which led us on to another study that we did, which we called Rabbit Rescues, which has now been out into schools. And this is where we had 123 children take part, split them into a couple of groups. One group got to interact with these mechanical rabbits here. So these rabbits kind of hop around, move the ears, make an unusual noise, which I wouldn't say is very rabbit-like, but still makes a noise. Another group had soft, fluffy rabbits, and then another group had nothing at all. And what was really interesting with these, again, we saw that before and after they took part in these activities, we saw improvements in animal welfare knowledge, we saw improvements in sentience and an understanding of animal sentience. We saw improvements in attitudes towards cruelty, and we also saw improvements in attachment to pets. And linked, obviously, with attachment, you link that also to compassionate behaviour. What was really interesting is that the mechanical toy improved the most for everything apart from attachment, whereas the fluffy rabbit led to greater improvements in attachment. So it showed, again, bring it back to what I said about older adults in care homes, is that having that tactile, that seems to be really important with how people interact with animals and what they get back from it. And that's led us on to, so we actually launched Animal Wise. So we've been through a bit of a kind of refresh over the summer holidays, and we've now launched Animal Wise. And this is all about educating everyone from every generation, from early years all the way up to older adults. And we've worked in partnership with MyAco to now run free e-learning courses for primary and secondary pupils. We've put more resources online, and we're now just starting to get back into schools. And now we've kind of adapted our classroom workshops, and we're going to be taking them out into the playground in the lovely Scottish weather. So I'm just going through how we kind of keep ourselves as dry as possible in the playground, but the school's been very receptive for this idea. We teamed up with a company called RoboWonderkind. So we're actually using robotics to teach animal welfare in the classroom. And again, it's very much linked to with the modern age of kids kind of interaction with digital, where we get them to build a sort of robot animal style, and then they get to use coding. And they basically can program the robots to respond to different things. So we'll give them a real animal scenario, and we'll say, okay, how is your robot going to respond to that? Is it going to move across the floor? Is it going to make a sound? And what's really good with this technology is we can put like this little screen on, and they can actually draw an emoji on it. So they can draw that the animal might feel sad, that it's happy. So that's been a slightly different way to teach animal welfare in the classroom. And what's really good is it gets them hooked, it gets them inspired and want to take part because it's something different, and different to what they're used to doing. And for the younger ones, they've loved having the rabbits in the classroom. We went on to hamsters this year. Again, we're trying to focus on common pets that this age group tend to get and trying to teach them how to handle them properly, to be aware of about not being so noisy around them, thinking about what they need. So again, it's making sure you blend that sort of real practical activities with the theory behind it as well. And then I've got our Animal Guardian symbol up here. This is a programme which we've been running since 2018. We've now had about 150 referrals to it. And this is for particularly primary age children who get referred to us because they are showing behaviours towards animals that are cause of concern. And sadly, in some cases, they have actually killed an animal. And referrals will come from maybe parents, from teachers, from social work, from Bernardo Scotland. We work a lot with them. And this is a one-to-one programme, and we spend a lot of time looking at recognition of emotions, not just animal emotions, but also human emotions, because we're finding that some are coming and they really struggle to interpret body language, interpret human emotions. So you kind of have to cover that first before you can move on to the animal side. And we look at needs and responsibilities. It is an education programme, it's not a psychological programme. So our aim is to equip with knowledge and skills and sort of key actions that they can do to make sure that if they still got an animal in the household, that everybody's kept safe. We're doing a lot more work so we can offer family support after this, because we're very well aware you can teach a child lots of things, but they're going back into the same environment. We've got a dedicated PhD student who is evaluating the programme. She's about to go into year 3, and we have done publications on this, and again, more than happy to share that after. But that's been really insightful for us, and unfortunately a lot of the kids who come to us are coming from quite chaotic background. There's poverty issues, there's drugs, alcohol issues, and this is the world that they're unfortunately living in at the moment. And sometimes they have such frustration, they struggle to control their behaviours, and unfortunately the animal is the one who then gets targeted. So that is certainly growing strength to strength each year, and we will just keep working with lots of different partners to make it the best possible support service that we can do. With secondary schools, again, we go in, we encourage them at secondary to think about careers. We encourage them to actually look at one of our investigations, and we get them to take on different roles within that. And we do a sort of mock courtroom in the classroom. So we will have the vet, we'll have the Scottish SSPCA inspector team, and they all have a look at evidence and they all present their findings back. That's been working really well with secondary pupils, because when you get to secondary, you want to have your opinion heard. You feel like you're an adult, but you're not actually quite there to being an adult. But you want that respect and that recognition that you're growing up. So that programme has been working really well. We've also just started a new programme with Woodmall High School, which run that at the moment every Wednesday afternoon. That's working with young people who are struggling to engage with education. They are maybe sort of spending a lot of time walking the corridors, not really in class. Some of them on that have actually been kicked out of most of the classes now for behaviour issues. And we're building a wildlife garden on site with them at the moment, and also in partnership with Code Plan, teaching them some basic technology skills. The other week I was there just teaching them about how to build a wildlife camera trap using this technology called Raspberry Pi, and then we're going to do a little bit of basics of web development so they can showcase what they've learned through the project and inadvertently gain some skills that would hopefully help them earn, even if it's just one national qualification, before they kind of most likely will end up heading out of school when they're about 16. So that's working really well. And again, as I say, we've got an e-learning course for secondary as well. We do continue a lot of community work, and that's really important. We'll hopefully get back to doing more events and open days as restrictions hopefully ease into next year. But that's so important that every local community knows the role that animals can play in their lives. If they come across wildlife, what do you do with that? It's great to watch wildlife, try not to pick animals up if they don't need it, things like that. So that's really important from a public messaging point of view. And there's lots of things we can do to safeguard the welfare of both. So yes, you have legislation and there's enforcement that comes with that by ourselves, by Police Scotland. And at the moment, there's loads of legislation going on just now. You probably saw about the Animals and Wildlife Bill. Well, it's now the Animals and Wildlife Act 2020. So some of that has now come into force. So instead of up for 1 year sentencing, you go up to now 5 years sentencing for the worst cases of animal cruelty. Hopefully this will act as a greater deterrent. There's lots of other measures that will be coming into place. And one of the key things for us is at the moment, we cannot rehome an animal that's part of a court case. We have to wait until that court case has been heard, which means some animals are in our care for 18 months or longer. When you seize a large number of animals, like we have recently seized 80 animals from a site, at the moment, those animals have to stay with us because the court case, I don't know when that actually get heard, but it will be quite a while. So part of the Animals and Wildlife Act will give us and others the ability to rehome the animal before that court case is heard within as little as 3 weeks, providing obviously the animal has passed all the veterinary sort of care and everything that's required and they are suitable and fit and healthy to be rehomed. And then what will happen is if we don't win that case, then it will go to a sort of compensation side of things, that that person wouldn't get their animal back. This is obviously been probably the hardest thing, I think, to kind of work out the rules and what the law is actually going to look like when that comes into play. But it's something that we hope will be in action soon, early next year. And there's loads of other measures that are coming in to do with tightening up on sort of regulating anyone who has like an animal sanctuary, which includes ourselves as well. So our rehoming centres, they will come under this inspection criteria, and hopefully tighten up a bit more on the activities involving these sort of visiting, travelling animal schemes, therapists, all those types of things, to make sure there's a bit more guidance for people so they know how to do it right and to do it well. One project that we established earlier on this year called the Animals and People Together project, and this is working with the care inspector in particular. Education Scotland are also part of the working group, and Society for Companion Animal Studies. This is looking at how can we make sure that if you are having animals on site in these different establishments, that best care is provided, that everybody who is involved on that site have the knowledge that they need to have to take care of the animal properly, and also that the safeguards are in place. So at the moment, we sometimes see, unfortunately, that you have a really enthusiastic manager of a site who loves animals, but then that manager moves on and no one else wants to take care of the animals that have now set up home on that site. So we're trying to put in a lot of protocols and a lot of support and guidance to make sure that everyone is supported and everyone knows how to look after themselves and the animals that are on there as well. So there's lots of things that we can do to make a difference. And as I say, with Animal Wise, we launched it and it was really kind of sort of covering, we want people to watch how they interact with animals, watch others, how they interact with animals, and make sure you report something if it's a concern. We want to make sure that people feel informed about animal welfare, that they know what's good animal welfare, what isn't. And that includes right up to sort of policy decision makers. We spend time obviously chatting to MSPs and those who are looking to change legislation to make sure that they fully understand if you change legislation, when you actually enforce that, is it going to work? Is it covered everything that you can think of to avoid any loopholes? We want to make sure that the support is available for those who really need it. So particularly Animal Gardens is a good example. So if someone's struggling to interpret an animal's behaviour or emotions and they end up lashing out on that animal, then what support can be offered to help that person? If someone is in a domestic violence situation and they cannot leave the home because they don't want to leave possibly a dog, cat, any animal behind, again, we're trying to support that with other organisations like Dogs Trust have their Freedom Project, making sure that, look, we can be there to help. We'll get the animal to safety to allow you to leave and to help you move on and set up a new life for yourselves. And then hopefully we can get the animal back to you. And again, it's encouraging everyone to be animal wise. Make sure that you ask about things. If you don't know about something, ask the questions, that you report things when you see it. We can only go out and help animals if people tell us about it. So again, really trying to get that message across, and we'll be working hard on promoting Animal Wise over this next year. We also feed into the One Welfare, sort of One Health framework. So I'm sitting on the One Welfare Phoenix Advisory Board at the moment, and that's taken a more global picture of looking at how can we work together across all the different organisations to provide the best possible guidance to help tackle this link between animal cruelty and violent crime, and get people to recognise the interdependencies between, whether it's child abuse, animal cruelty, there's hoarding, there's lots of different things that are all interconnected. And if you're tackling one issue, there's maybe other things you should also be looking at. So it's trying to have that bigger picture, and us as an organisation making sure that we do our part when it comes to sort of meeting the needs of the National Performance Framework, which is a framework operating in Scotland, trying to make Scotland the best place to live and grow up in. And that's ultimately linked to the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which so many organisations now are trying to do their part in creating a better society around us and a better world for everyone to grow up in and be safe. So as you can see, I've mentioned lots of different partners throughout, and working together is certainly key. Everything that we do, we like to make sure that we evaluate what we do and that we use the best research that's there to help inform our decisions as well, which is why we work so closely, particularly with the University of Glasgow, Edinburgh and University of Stirling. And this is quite important, that we also publicise our research findings to help share that knowledge with others in the same field, but not just in the animal welfare field, but also in the human field as well. And it's bringing it back to what I spoke to in the earlier, that when you have lots of things going on, often at heart there is potentially an animal and there's potentially a child who needs support and needs help. And there's lots of different professions who are interacting and engaging with them on a day-to-day basis. So we need to get that awareness up, that everyone has a role to play and everyone should be working together and helping share and protect those around us. So here's just some of the examples. As you can see, some of these are well-known animal welfare organisations, but we do work with a lot of human organisations as well. And I think if you speak to anyone who works in this field, you'll soon learn very quickly that it's so important that we connect these human animal organisations together to make a bigger impact, to make a bigger difference. I'm just going to finish off with Dara here, who I think says it all when it comes to what we think about animals when we are younger and how important they can be. So, say this.
I have a dog and her name is called Tula. She is very playful and she like licks me when I feel like I'm crying, if I'm upset or hurt, and so yeah, I pretty much love her, and she's also my best friend. Well, I'm actually a big fan of being a vet or a teacher, so
A surgeon, because I want to help people and I might do a bit on the animals as well.
So yeah, I think they kind of say it all, to be honest, and every time I see that, it just reminds me of why I do the role that I do, and always when you're out and about, it's inspiring to see lots of young kids, and that's the future, particularly when it comes to protecting this human animal bond. We need to encourage those who feel inspired and make sure, you know, that we are there to support that journey and support the families around them.